Dan was working on that too, but he didn't quite come up with it.
channel. All right. Using the Slack channel to occasionally drop bits of history of the conference.
Oh, very good.
We're all getting old, and we're starting to realize that a lot of that institutional memory goes away as people stop attending.
Uh-huh. That's very smart. And I love Slack.
Slack's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, it scraped a whole bunch of staff email off, and put it into Slack, which made it easier to handle, but Good morning. How was the first day? So I was going over remembering what I said yesterday and realized that I didn't introduce myself. My name is John Mayer, and I'm the executive director of Cali. Well, a third of you rose your hands as this is the first time you've been to this conference. So all day you were going, well, who was that guy up there? So John Mayer, executive director of Cali, glad you could make it. Here we are on day 2 of the conference. Got a lot of housekeeping. I always have to thank our hosts. It's been. Is this an awesome building? It's like I think they spent their money right. Thank you for the sponsors. Without the sponsors, you'd still get food, but it would be more like hardtack and corn pones. Instead of yogurt and fruit all the time. Thanks, folks. We really appreciate your support. You sponsors, I hope some of them are in the audience, are part of our community. We don't restrict them from coming to the events, or you can't eat the food, or you can't come to the... Matter of fact, we want them to be here in between and in and amongst us, because we want them to hear what we have to say so that they create things that are actually relevant and useful for our purposes. Thank you, folks. Don't forget, if you want to be in the raffle, you have to visit at least 8 of those sponsors, get the little stickers, and stick it in the raffle box, which is in the registration room 144. Cali staff, board members are not eligible, I'm sorry. Don't forget the Twitter hashtag CaliCon16. Don't forget the Slack channel. I've been trying to post some little history tidbits from past conferences there. And don't forget that you can always replace your t-shirt if you haven't done so already for a smaller or larger size. Whoops. GSU wants to bring me to remind you that there are tours today as well as there were yesterday at 12:15 at these locations. Now this is just a picture from this thing, so you don't have to write those down. You just look down at your own name tag and it will have that information. The session Damn Lies and Statistics, which is at 2:30 in room 242, has been recast as LII, Justia, and Oye, a Supreme Court combination. So, luggage may be left in room 144. Reminder, this is tomorrow, or we'll sell it if you don't pick it up by 2 o'clock. That's yesterday's joke, sorry. Note to the speakers, during question and answer period, please repeat the question at the mic so that the recording or the archive of the session, has the question. Isn't that annoying? You're watching a YouTube and you hear a silence with a little, and the guy goes, "Oh, that's a fantastic question." And you're like, What? So repeat the question, please. CSSIS group is meeting up today at lunch, so get some lunch and then head over to 246. The Wiggle Dooley Working Group for Distance Learning and Legal Education Group. I know they hate when I say Wiggle Dooley, but I think it's kind of funny. Are having an informal meetup in room 245, and Michael Feldstein is going to speak to us. Now, Michael, it's funny. I actually know Michael a long time, but this is the first time we've met. Maybe 10 years, maybe more than 10 years. He's a principal at MindWires Consulting, so if you need consulting, consider MindWires. But the place where I've learned him is at e-Literate. It's a blog where I never saw this tagline, what we are learning about online learning, online. But the thing about Michael, or the thing about the blog is he's not a blogger. I'm sorry, you're not a blogger, you're a journalist. Because he actually picks up the phone or talks to people before he writes a blog post, or he actually does investigation that elicits more information than what is just available from clicking around or reading press releases and digs deeper. And I've always been informed by reading your articles and always had the benefit of that. He's been around a long time too. He looks much younger than he actually is. He's worked at Cengage, Oracle, at SUNY. He's been on the board of directors, was on the board of directors of Sakai. And there's many others that are quite humorous to read if you click the About button on his blog. So without further ado, Michael Feldstein. All right, first time.
Thank you all. It's great to be here. First time speaking in a courtroom when I haven't been under indictment. So, and it's also a great pleasure to be introduced by one of my longtime heroes, Indiana Jones. Actually, John and I, he's right, we've known each other on the internet for a long time. Sorry, I'm fishing for my remote while I talk. John and I have known each other on the internet for a long time. I am one of the, in the history of people complaining about educational technology on the internet, I am one of the pioneer complainers. But before I was there, John was there, and he wasn't complaining, he was actually doing things. And so he's one of the reasons why I keep doing what I'm doing, because when I arrived, he was one of the people who convinced me that this whole internet thing maybe wasn't just a fad. So thank you, John.
You're welcome.
The title of my talk is Do Law Schools Exist? I understand there's been some discussion about whether they will exist in the future, but that's not the question I'm asking right now. The question I'm asking is whether they exist today. I was a philosophy major as an undergraduate, which prepared me for a career in anything except philosophy, and now apparently law. I don't know. What, too soon? So I'm going to say some mean things about your colleagues, your institutions, and your profession. And so in fairness, before I do that, I think I should tell you a few humiliating stories about me. For example, I once started a business teaching people who thought they were tone deaf how to sing in an effort to meet and date women. One in particular. It failed miserably. The dating part. Actually, the teaching part went pretty well. I had a few students by the time I managed to extricate myself from that ridiculous situation that I managed to get myself into. They were all horrible singers, but none of them was tone deaf. I believe there probably are people in the world who are genuinely tone deaf, but I have not met one. What I have met was people who never learned how to hear pitch. And so, this object of my unrequited affections, when she would sing, she had no sense of whether the next note was above or below, or how much it was above or below the note she had just sung. And so we did some basic things about asking her, well, is the next note higher or lower? Is it a little higher or is it a lot higher? Can you move your hand to show me to how much higher or lower it is? And slowly, by degrees, she learned to sing and fall in love with someone else. But the important thing was, in retrospect, the important thing was she learned to sing. And if you think about it, some of us were lucky. We had great elementary school music classes. Many of us were not. If you didn't, then whether you can sing and how well you can hear pitch and carry a tune is pretty much luck. Either you were born with enough talent that you could learn it yourself, or you weren't. And we all have areas like that. And for me, it's pretty much anything physical. As a child, I lived in mortal fear that someone would throw me a Frisbee. It's just the way it is. I am now, I have chronic back pain, and I now go to weekly lessons to physical therapists and Pilates teachers and so on, who are essentially teaching me how to sit, walk, and stand. Because apparently I never learned those things. And it's likewise noticing things in the physical world. I really should have been a brain in a vat. I don't have much awareness of my surroundings. I miss things like stop signs and traffic lights. My wife, who is thankfully not like that at all, gave me a camera one day and said, here, why don't you take some pictures? And slowly, I still don't always notice traffic lights, but I am now occasionally noticing sunsets and trees and, people in the city, and it's a good thing. So this experience that we have of going from not being able to do something to being able to do something with a little help, there's a term of art for this. We call it teaching. Right? We are all, if you're here, you're probably pretty smart, and you're probably pretty good at teaching yourself how to do things. Not everything, but some things, right? There are times when we are incapable of learning something by ourselves, but we can learn with a little help. And to go further into the lingo, there was an educational theorist by the name of Lev Vygotsky, who talks about the zone of proximal development, or if you're one of the cool kids, the ZPD. His basic idea was there are certain things you're going to be able to learn how to do on your own. I'm pretty good learning how to use software. If you give me a piece of consumer software and tell me what it's supposed to do, chances are pretty good I can figure out how to do it. There are certain things I will never, ever be able to learn how to do, like shoot a basket. And then there's stuff in the middle, like noticing sunsets or sitting in ways that don't hurt my back, that I can learn with help. And that area, that space in between, that area where we can learn with help, is called the zone of proximal development. That's it. That is where teaching happens, right? I understand you've been talking a lot about assessment in this profession recently. The zone of proximal development is a test not of the student, but of the teacher. How far can we take a student beyond their ability to achieve something on their own? Right? So let's ask a question. Are law schools working in the zone of proximal development right now? And just for the sake of, entertainment, let's pick a point of comparison. Community colleges. Community colleges accept everyone. Everyone. I recently had cause to visit Essex County College in Newark, New Jersey. They take students, not just a few, but many, whose math skills are at a 4th grade level. And they commit to getting those students up to college level math by the time they graduate. Everybody. Average tuition is $3,347. 6-year completion rate for full-time students is 57%, a little more than half. It is both simultaneously disgraceful and miraculous. Now let's talk a little bit about law schools. Highly selective, right? I know you're all complaining that the students you have to take now aren't as good as the ones that you used to be able to take, but they're still pretty darn good. You're talking about smart students who've gone to good schools and done pretty well, right? Definitely not starting at 4th grade math levels. Average tuition, $41,985. Bar exam pass rate, 62.4%. Now, I know what some of you are saying. This is apples to oranges. This is not a fair comparison. You're right, it's not fair. This is the pass rate for people who have managed to graduate from law school. If we factored in the numbers who dropped out, it would actually be worse. So community colleges accept everyone, pass rate of graduation rate of 57%. Law schools accept only the cream of the crop, or maybe now the milk. Bar exam pass rate of 62.4%. So, ooh, my screen just went dark.
Yep. Would be a Kelly conversation.
There we go.
Technical glitch. Oh, there we go.
All right. Right. So, if a keynote speaker gives a talk and no one can see his PowerPoints, does he make a sound? Going back to my original question, if a law school professor lectures in the hall and nobody understands her, does she make a sound, right? So are you actually teaching in law schools? That's the question that we're asking, right? Now, let me give you a case study. Before we dig into that question, let me show you a story about, before I walk away from the microphone, let me show you a story about Middlebury College, which is the kind of place that I'm sure many of you would be going to recruit your law school students. It's a highly selective school. Tuition there is more than the cost of my first 5 cars combined as a young man. Student-teacher ratio of 9.5 to 1. Really terrific. And we went, my partner and I, business partner and I, went up to Middlebury as part of a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They've been talking about this personalized learning thing, which we'll talk about a little later. And they've basically given us a grant to go out to real schools and see how they're using these technologies and whether they're successful and how they're successful and what success means. But before we wanted to do that, we wanted to go to a place that wasn't a grantee to find out what it was that, if we think about personal learning and our American ideal of it, what does that really look like and how does it compare to talk about personalized learning at Essex County College in Newark, New Jersey versus personalized learning in Middlebury, Vermont. And we were surprised at what we found. This is a story about a professor and his students who I think you will recognize. I'll just skip through the introduction. Maybe I won't show.
Don't touch it.
Hi, I'm Michael Feldstein. Welcome to e-Literate TV's series on personalized learning. In our last episode, we learned a little bit about Middlebury College, an elite New England liberal arts school, where they worry as much about technology's potential to depersonalize learning as they do about its potential to further personalize learning. But we also saw that that state of affairs is evolving as students and young faculty members come to the campus with new attitudes and new comfort levels with technology. Now we're going to learn about just how far one of their professors wants to go. Jeff Howarth teaches a class in GIS, or Geographic Information Systems.
It's primarily a course about learning how to think spatially, how to recognize a kind of a spatial dimension or spatial perspective to a problem, and how you can kind of take that spatial perspective to solve the problem in a new way. So it primarily revolves on kind of spatial thinking skills that students typically don't learn formally until they come to this kind of a class.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a little color commentary as we go. Right, so here's a guy, this is a gen ed class in geographical information systems, which is weird, right? But Jeff's just explained what he's really teaching is spatial reasoning. And like singing, there's a pretty good chance that no one ever really taught you this, right? So you come into class, and either you have the natural talent to reason spatially on your own, or you don't, in which case you're clueless and you need some help, right? And so even at a place like Middlebury, where you have some very, very smart, pretty much all of your students are very, very smart, you're going to get a spread in that class of talent and ability and, you know, where they're starting from. Now, this is a 100 level class. It's not pitched at folks who want to become geographers necessarily. Why is it important for students to learn this?
Well, nowadays it's hard to, maps are everywhere. I mean, you can start just from the basic, it's a privacy issue. If you carry a smartphone, you're a data point, and you should be aware of what kind of privacy risks you have just by always having a location attached to everything that you do. So nowadays, I think fundamentally just to be just aware of privacy, it's worth kind of understanding what you can do with location-based data. But beyond that, I think I got into this because I could never really settle down on a particular discipline. I was interested in geomorphology, I was interested in botany, I was interested in people. And what I found is that the map was a really helpful framework and methodology for bringing together different perspectives and kind of thinking interdisciplinary. So that's another kind of reason it's actually required of all environmental studies students and also all geography students. And then a lot of people take it as an elective.
Jeff's class. So let's again pause here. I wanted you to think about what you just heard about his comment about his discipline in relation to yours. And what he was saying is, everybody needs to know a little bit of what I know in order to function in the modern world. And then there's more that people may get passionate about as they discover what this is all really about. That's what happened to me. That's why I'm a professor in this area, right? And so the scope of need here, of interest, is broader than you might think. And I just screwed up the video, so I'm going to have to
learn formally until they come
pitched at folks
having a location. Got into this because framework and method.
But it also has a reputation of being very difficult.
The course really has had a reputation for being extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming for students. It was something of a badge of honor to have gotten through the GIS course for years.
Students slept in the labs.
Okay. Students slept in the labs. Now here is where the paper chase fantasy starts, right? Okay. This is a fantastic story, right? Great teacher cares about his students, inspires them to work so hard. Students slept in the labs. That's amazing. Well, that's not the way Jeff saw it. Oh, gosh. I just built up the drama. Let's see.
Problem. And what I would notice is that there were a live demonstration was to...
Students slept in the labs.
So I used the approach I've always used, and I inherited it from a predecessor here named Bob Churchill, was to teach originally through a worked example and then slowly kind of fade out. So in the worked example, you give students a problem goal, you give them the means to solve it, and then you show them the kind of step-by-step how they should solve the problem. And it would happen in a kind of a live demonstration where I'd have 15 students in a room and kind of work through over 2 hours and 45 minutes, here's how you solve this problem. And I would be talking while I was at the board kind of clicking, showing them how that they would work through the kind of the graphical user interface to solve the problem. And what I would notice is that there would be some students who would like me to go a little bit faster, but had to wait and kind of daydream because they were just kind of waiting. And then there were some students that desperately wanted me to slow down. And then you get into that kind of slowest car on the freeway, how fast you can really go type of thing. So I would kind of slow down, which would lose part of the group. And then there would be some folks that probably would want me to slow down but would never ask because they don't want to call attention to themselves as being the kind of the slow car on the freeway.
At this point, Jeff realized, does that resonate with you? Right? Does that sound familiar? Let's see if I can do this right now. So close.
Desperately wanted me to slow down and slow down but would never ask because they don't want to call attention to themselves as being the kind of the slow car on the freeway.
At this point, Jeff realized that even his small class might not be as personalized as it could be with the support of a little more technology.
So what I realized is that if I just started packaging that instruction, the worked example, I could deliver the same content but allow students to kind of first, if I made videos posted it on something like YouTube, I was putting out the same content, but students could now kind of watch it at their own pace and in kind of privacy of being able to go as slow as they need to without the kind of social hang-ups of being considered different. So that was really the kind of the first step of I kind of did all of this, and then I told an older colleague in languages what I was doing, and he said, well, that's called flipping the classroom. And I thought, okay, but that's not really why. So I did it without knowing that I was flipping the classroom, but then that's how it happened.
And this is an
So here's a guy, right? He's not steeped in educational technology. He's clearly interested in teaching and learning. He's talked about worked examples. He's picked up some of the lingo. But he's looking in the back of the class and he's noticing he's losing some people. And when he slows down, he notices he loses other people, right? So what he's done is not revolutionary, right? It's a start, right? So much we develop a lot of lingo to talk about things that are common sense. When I was teaching my student about pitch, and I would get her to practice and sing with me, and I would ask her, is that higher or lower? How much higher? How much lower? We might call that in this environment formative assessment, right? Which is, the lesser kind of assessment in our world somehow, right? But it's where the actual teaching happens. It's, do you get this yet? Are you getting it? What are you missing, right? In his case, Jeff started with a very simple place, which is, okay, some of you need me to go faster than others. I can't do that live, but if I just use a very simple tool like one we're using right now, I'm pretty sure that I'm not smart enough to keep you running so that you don't get what I'm saying. But if I were, then some of you could go back and watch this talk and review the parts that you thought were great. Now you just have to go back and watch for the funny parts because that's all I got. But so let's continue just a little more because it's interesting to see where Jeff takes
I did all of this, and then I told an older colleague in languages what I was doing, and he said, well, that's called flipping the classroom. And I thought, okay, but that's not really why. So I did it without knowing that I was flipping the classroom, but then that's how it happened.
And this is an important element pedagogically because I read the student course reviews, the evaluations, and what struck me, and there were about 50-something students in the class the first time he flipped it, and what was striking about it was students' comments, to Susan's point, about difficult subject matter. Students themselves said, if you sit in this class and you miss something, you have it in your notes, you have to go and see the faculty member and figure out what happened during office hours and so forth. You have to remember those questions and ask them. When you have the lectures ahead of time, and so you can go back over and over again and listen until you understand this. And so the comments were something to the effect, finally, a faculty member who understands how we learn. The ability for students to sort of get through difficult material by looking at it over and over again and trying to figure it out on their own time. And they found that to be extremely valuable, thereby able to use the time in class or with the faculty member to do specific work on a project. This is a pedagogical breakthrough in many ways because it's counterintuitive to what we like to think about as a Middlebury education, one-on-one with the faculty member all the time. But in this case, providing that information up front gives the student the opportunity to work at their pace and to sort of work through some of the difficulties that they personally had in the course material.
This experience has prompted Jeff to think about whether even the traditional structure of lecture and lab periods is outdated and depersonalizing, and whether technology could help him do something better.
So part of it is there's always been this division between there's a general kind of timeless side to spatial analysis and spatial visualization that is also kind of largely conceptual. And then there's the kind of, the surest way to be out of date is to be cutting edge. So there's always this kind of, current way that you implement these kind of concepts with some kind of a software system. And that's always been kind of split in the kind of lecture versus lab format, where the lecture is all the kind of conceptual stuff and the lab is the kind of state of the art, how you do it. And there's a lot of dilemmas there for me as an instructor because I know that a good part of my teaching is going to be outdated in just a year, depending on when the new software comes out. And there's also this kind of, it forces the student into a certain pattern of learning where they have to learn all the conceptual stuff first. And then there's this gap between the lecture and the lab. and then they get all of the implementation in the lab, and it's largely up to them and the efforts that I can kind of offer to do the synthesis and to integrate those two kind of different types of learning in a way, the kind of conceptual side and the graphical user interface side. So what I've started to think about is if I was going to basically start designing the lecture content so that it could go online, that you could package the instruction in ways that are going to kind of facilitate different types of learners. So everyone right now is forced to go through all the conceptual stuff first and then all the implementation stuff. But you can always think about a big problem in terms of sub-problems and tasks. And the way that it's kind of set up right now is that this all gets presented in the lecture, and then this all gets presented traditionally in the lab. And what I've done is just take this component and put it onto YouTube. And so the way that everyone right now gets the material is they go through this sequence in lecture, there's the break, they go through this section in the lab. It's up to them to basically start to kind of put it all together. And then the idea is that if you started presenting the content as this kind of matrix online, where you were packaging kind of discrete, kind of conceptual discussions of here's what's happening underneath the hood for kind of representing distance in a kind of a raster framework of GIS, versus here's now how you implement that concept with this flavor of GIS. And if you started packaging like this, you could get students that could go through like this, where they'd watch the conceptual explanation and then learn how to implement it, then go back to conceptual, then implement it, and going this way, which some types of learners I think are going to be more engaged with, versus there are going to be some folks that just want to click and get a result and then maybe know how to interpret that result by looking at the kind of schematic presentation of it. But the idea is that based on how you kind of design and package in a kind of a problem frame format, which I tend to use, you can kind of create different opportunities for the students to self-sequence the material.
That time I really meant to do that. So I don't know about for you, but for me, watching him think through this process was fascinating. I mean, Jeff was basically arguing that the very structure of our course schedule works against certain types of learners. And in an off-camera piece, well, a piece that didn't make it past the cutting room floor, he elaborated further and pointed out correctly that this idea of taking an abstract principle and applying it to there we go. There you go. Applying it under certain circumstances is a form of expert thinking, right? And this is true across domains, right? As you become expert at a situation, at a domain, you learn to think about you see the features that matter, you abstract away the features that don't, and you say, oh, this is one of those situations, right? The place where there's been the most writing about it is actually chess playing. But we see it over and over and over again. And expert thinkers can't remember what it's like to be non-expert thinkers. They don't remember what it's like to be novice thinkers. They only think that way. I'm going to give you the principle, and then you're going to apply it. They don't remember that that's not how they themselves learned to become expert thinkers. Novice thinkers start with the specific and learn to generalize. So, for example, there was a result out of Carnegie Mellon University on math teaching that students actually learn how to calculate the slope of a positive line, of an upward moving line, separately from calculating the slope of a downward sloping line. And it's only after some practice that they bring these two together. Now, that notion is just bizarre if you're a mathematician. It doesn't make any sense. But that's the way we work through these things. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. But I suspect that there is a fair bit of this in your domain as well. And I suspect that there's a fair bit of this kind of, there's a term of art for it, expert blindness, in your classrooms as well. And if you're not doing constant, continuous formative assessment to see whether your students are getting it, you're going to remain blind. So I'll tell you at this point that like my adventure in teaching tone-deaf people how to sing, my adventure in educational technology has been purely accidental and in some respects probably ill-considered in retrospect. I am a teacher from a family of teachers. That's what I care about. The technology, I like my toys, but I'm passionate about teaching. And one of the reasons that I got attracted to educational technology is that I found that I could have conversations with people about teaching through technology that I couldn't have without it. Most folks who stand in front of the classroom have a big investment in believing that they are not entirely incompetent and ignorant. And it's really unfortunate because it's not their fault that they've gone through 4 years of undergraduate school and then another 5 or 6 or 7 years of graduate school, and nobody's ever given them one class in pedagogy. They have no reason to feel guilt or shame about not knowing, and yet they do. And that problem is greatly exacerbated by the fact in many colleges and universities, most, in fact, they're not really compensated for their knowledge in pedagogy. They're compensated for their expertise in their academic field, right? So they, when you start talking to them about, gosh, really, you don't check to see if your students understand halfway through the class? Really? They find that insulting and difficult to listen to. But if you say, we're going to be using this new technology, they say, I don't know anything about technology. Thank goodness you're here to help me, right? And what you hear over and over and over again, no matter what discipline or what kind of school you're working with, probably a lot of you folks have had this experience because I know we have some ed tech support folks in the room. You have faculty members who learn something because they have to teach online or they have to teach with this newfangled LMS thing or they have to teach with some tool that forced them to rethink their teaching. And they come back and they have these conversations that they didn't know were possible to have with people about how to teach. And suddenly, this whole world has opened up to them. Suddenly, they can see traffic lights and stop signs. And it changes the way that I've heard over and over again. I taught online, and it's changed the way I teach in the classroom. Right. So the educational technology is an opportunity to bring this conversation to them in a way that is not offensive, does not insult their intelligence, and may actually feel positive and interesting to them. And they may actually be grateful for it. So stepping aside slightly from all of that, in the world of ed tech, there's been endless chatter. Ed tech is really it's a fashion world, right? What's in style this year? This is the year of MOOCs. This is the year of analytics. Oh, MOOCs are so 2012 now. This year is 2016 is the year of personalized learning. And it's a fantastic term because it means absolutely nothing. First of all, isn't learning something the student does? How does they personalize the thing that they're doing themselves? How do you personalize it for them? And what does it even mean to personalize it, right? And what personalized learning really means is new and improved, or 99 and 44/100% pure. It's a label that vendors are sticking on their products. But since it doesn't actually mean anything, my business partner and I we've decided we're going to colonize it. We're going to claim squatters' rights on it and try to turn it into something meaningful. So when we go out and we did all these case studies, we visited all these schools, we said, all right, you've got this personalized learning software. What are you actually doing? We saw 3 patterns. None of these patterns require technology. all of them can be helped by technology, and all of them, the technology can facilitate a conversation about them. All right. So now the first one was stop broadcasting content in the classroom. You, Professor Jones, are one of the world's experts on your topic. These students have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have a conversation with you. They can listen to you lecture for the rest of their careers by going to your conferences. You can put this on video, right? Why are you denying them the benefit of your insight by just talking at them, right? So flipping the classroom, that's another fashion, ed tech fashion. That's really what it's about. Right? Getting content out of the classroom so that we can talk with our students, get to know them, find out how they're doing, not just talk to them, but listen to them. Turning homework time into contact time, right? So, okay, you come in, you've listened to me, you've received my pearls of wisdom. Now go forth and prosper. Go do your homework. And I don't know what you do there. I don't know if you read. I don't know if you do the practice. I don't know if you guys get together. Probably if you're law students, you're going to be doing something because you got to law school by working hard, but I don't know if what you're doing is effective. I don't know if you're actually getting anything out of it. And when you come into classroom, I don't know if you learned what you were supposed to have learned through the work you did outside the classroom, right? So there are lots of ways you can check on that by, for example, asking them in classroom. But there are technologies. Learning analytics is certainly one of them, right? This is another hot topic. You can give them homework. You can see how they do. When you walk into the classroom, it's like you've got these I like to think of them as the cobbler's elves. They go out and they tutor the students one-on-one, and they come back, and in the morning they magically prepare a report to tell you which students are struggling and how many, which concepts the whole class is struggling on, and so on. But you can do this with other ways too. Just have an online discussion, right? You can't always, be there for their discussions, but if the discussions are online, then at least you can find a little time to glance in and see what they're saying, right? On Slack or on Blackboard or on Lotus Notes or whatever it is you're using. Yeah, I've been in this for a while. And the last one is tutoring. And software is really good at teaching low-level concepts. And I suspect in your discipline, as in many, there are lots of just factual things that people need to memorize, precedents, whatever it is, right? And they need to memorize those, not because they're the be-all and end-all, but they need to be able to extrapolate from them. They need to be able to reason from them. They need to be able to argue from them, right? So software is really good. It's an infinitely patient tutor. It's not a very smart tutor, but it is infinitely patient. And there are ways in which the software can help the students. And wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to tell them all these precedents when they walked in the class? Yes, you're used to having students who are freakishly good at reading these god-awful, boring, dry books of case studies and so on. I say that as a non-lawyer. I was a philosophy major. What do I know about god-awful, boring? But you have students who you're used to getting who are freakishly good at that, right? This was not the zone of proximal development for them, memorization, learning these precedents. Now you have different students. They do need this help, some of them. It doesn't mean they're stupid. And by the way, the zone of proximal development also doesn't just apply to remediation. I don't know how many of you have ever had the pleasure of sitting in on a master class by someone like Yo-Yo Ma or Emmanuel Axe or some great performer teaching some up-and-coming great performer, right? We all always need teachers, even at the things that we are really good at, right? So that is the job you take on when you stand at the front of the room rather than the back of the room. So all of these methods that I'm talking about here, they're all really aimed at giving you these tools. First of all, giving you a vocabulary, and giving you an understanding that that is what you're taking on. Because there are a lot of faculty, again, who because of the way we structure our institutions and our incentives, they don't see that as their role. They don't see the zone of proximal development as an assessment of them, right? But it doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean they don't want their students to succeed. It doesn't mean, more often than not, part of it is they've given up trying because they don't know how to do better than they do. And if you can open up an avenue for them where they can see success because, actually, it wasn't that hard. I just talked to the student. It wasn't that hard. I just gave them a chance to give me feedback, and I could see how they were doing, right? It can be life-changing, really, in a good way. So I, in the spirit of practicing what I preach at least a little bit, I'm going to ask two questions. Consider this formative assessment. I'm not sure whether it's of you or me, but we'll find out. One, to what extent is your institution a school, something that works people through the zone of proximal development, versus a filtering mechanism tied to a self-study center? Are you actually teaching students, or are you just selecting students and giving them an opportunity to teach themselves? And then, because number one worked great. You didn't need to do much more than number one for a long, long time. What might change if law schools graduated students who are in the ZPD, zone of proximal development, for skills related to passing the bar exam, but off the chart brilliant in other areas like business or machine learning, right? What would happen if you were able to expand the universe of people who were brilliant, not necessarily brilliant lawyers, but brilliant, who could become truly competent and knowledgeable in the law? That's what it means to increase your graduation rates for these students who are not traditional law students, who you might otherwise fail out. So, fire away.
Questions?
Yes.
Hi, I am the law firm librarian here, and I want desperately, please, provide number two. That's what we want. We need people who know about business and know something other than how to pass the bar exam. Please, please, please.
Is there a question in there?
No, it was just...
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the one hand, you risk, of course, always, that the brilliant person who graduates from your school will be the one to invent the next LegalZoom. But that's okay. I mean, they might also be the one who I can't even imagine. That's kind of the point, right? I can't even imagine what these people would be doing, and you probably have them at your school already. They're the ones that people are complaining about, right? I said I was a teacher from a family of teachers. What I didn't tell you was my specialty was 8th grade, 13-year-olds. I used to love the problem students, and I still do, because they're the ones, they got something on their minds other than just making me happy. Right? And your problem students could be your superstars.
Go back one screen to the questions.
Yes.
I have a question. So I think a lot of schools, I think a lot of students might treat their schools as a filtering mechanism tied to their own self-study, especially when they finish law school and are told, well, you're not a lawyer until you pass the bar. So go take the 6-week course, which is going to recapitulate 3 years of law school. Mm-hmm. and that's what's preventing you from getting a job or getting, what's the word, becoming certified to be a lawyer. And so in some ways the marketplace has set itself up for the students to self-select for, I just have to get past these requirements in order to get that gold ring.
Well, sure, and look, they're 21 years old. What 21-year-old doesn't think they're an immortal genius? Especially a 21-year-old who's in law school. That's just the way it is. That is the nature of 21-year-old law school students. Now, you probably have your mix of post-traditional students who are a little more humble. Life does that to one, hopefully. But that is one of the first purposes of formative assessment, right? One of the things that, going to the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that we know about at-risk students in community college and sort of open enrollment-ish state colleges and universities is they're not very good at knowing when they're over their heads. They're not very good at knowing when they're failing. They're not very good at knowing when they need to seek help. And that's probably also true for students who have been smart enough to glide by for the first 21 years of their life and suddenly find themselves in a harder environment. I know it was true for me. Your first goal with a formative assessment is to show the student how little they know, right? Not in a mean way, but just, hey, you're not getting it yet. If you wait until the bar exam to show them they're not a genius and they're not getting it all, well, that's not much help to them.
I guess my question is a little different from what everybody else would have. I'm at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where we have more of an open enrollment, closed graduation, because we carve out the first third, the bottom third of the first year class after the first year class.
Fantastic.
So I think part of the problem we have is once you've knocked them down, how do you build them back up to say you can pass this exam? And teaching them, we have a lot of private practitioners that come out of our school, so then it's teaching them how to be true lawyers, lawyering skills, client interaction and clinic work, and giving them that confidence that they can pass the exam. So I think my question is, we're trying to incorporate assessment, and what we found is it's really hard to, for our subject, legal research, hard to do an assessment. Do we do a pre-post test? What kind of assessment would gauge whether we're teaching them anything?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? There's a real divide, and I think you've put your finger on it. When we talk to faculty, like the kids who slept in the lab at Middlebury College, they have no doubt that they can pass that class, right? They might have been wrong, but they had no doubt. When we went to Essex County College, or when we went to Empire State College in New York, that accepts a lot of post-traditional students. These are students who've been, working as plumbers or, daycare assistants. They're 30 years old. They have kids. They were never told that they could succeed at college. And they don't believe they belong there, right? So when you have that problem, the formative assessment is about showing improvement. I mean, you need to do more of it, and you need to present it. Like the difference between formative and summative really is about grading, right? It's about, does this count? And one thing we're really bad at, because we're so geared academia is so geared at certifying that you've made it, that you know it, right? We're really bad at saying, all right, you've made the next step, you're on your way, right? But that's exactly what they need, right? I saw it, and it's true, it doesn't matter if they're in law school or preschool, it doesn't matter, what socioeconomic strata you come from. I still need coaching to believe that I could ever catch a Frisbee, right? I come from a very privileged background, but they're all things that we have learned to believe that we can't do, that we're wrong about, right? And so I saw a TED Talk once that made me cry about an elementary school principal or a teacher, I think it was in Baltimore, but really you can fill in, it could be Detroit or any one of these urban environments where the students just don't get the resources and the encouragement that they could. And she had won this major Teacher of the Year award. It may have even been a MacArthur Award. And she tells a story about a kid who got a 20% on the first test of the year, and she put 20% on, and she put a big smiley face on it. And the kid came up and said, well, I don't understand. I got a 20%. Isn't that a fail? And she said, yeah. And he said, well, why did you put a smiley face on? He said, because you got 20% right. Next time you're going to get more right, right? And that kid went off to be a superstar student in her class. And we have similar stories. If you go online to e-Literate.tv and look at the first episode from Empire State College, they have a prior learning assessment where they give these non-traditional students credit for what they already know. But there is, in fact, a woman who was running a daycare center who was interviewed in that episode, and she talks about how she comes into the fair at the beginning of the semester, and basically the faculty and the advisors talk her through all the things she's had to manage in her life at work and at home, and how those count, right? How you're not starting from zero. So formative assessment, right? It's not good for one thing, right? It's your GPS. If you think you're lost, it can help you show you're not as lost as you think you are. If you think you're not lost, it can help you show you're a little bit further from where you thought you were.
I'm a law professor that comes from a family of half lawyers, half teachers, so I'm the one who split the baby. I have two, one's a comment, one's a question. We have to remember, I think, that law school is not about teaching to pass the bar exam. We need to make sure they do pass the bar exam, but that's an entrance minimal competency exam, and if I graduate students who can just pass the bar exam, I'm terrified for what happens when they go out to practice.
Amen.
So the two are not equated. And a lot of our students are going to be excellent lawyers, but are just poor test takers.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a divide there that I don't think was fairly assessed in what, and I respect that because you had 55 minutes to do it. My question comes back to the novice expert issue, and I think it's on both sides, so I'd like to hear your comment. I have expert colleagues, myself included, who have a very hard time remembering how novice they have to think about it, and I'm teaching a summer class where I had to do it last night, so I'm very in that key. On the other hand, what do I do with my novice students who I tell, look, I understand, I have a lot of part-time students, they've been very successful in careers. They're not willing to go back to be novices.
Right.
They have a very hard time accepting that their expertise, particularly in this changing generation where their expertise should carry over in their mind.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah. So, I guess there are two parts. One, how do you get better at remembering what it's like to be a novice, or if you can't do that, at least knowing how to teach them better. And number two, how do you deal with students who don't want to think of themselves as novices? The answer to the first question is to do what you're doing now, which is to come to meetings with other people who are interested in that. We all have, there's tons and tons of knowledge out there about this, and there are, you're right, I was, my interest was in being provocative at the expense of accuracy. I'm a blogger, that's what I do. I'm sure there are lots and lots of great, passionate and skilled law professors out there, as well as people in fields of education and educational technology who have answers to that question. There's lots to be read about it I wish that the field weren't as fragmented as it is. I wish I could point you to one place. I cannot. But there's. I would start by Googling expert blindness. In terms of the students, look. I think our current election cycle proves that people are going to make their own decisions. And I say that, it doesn't matter where you stand on the party spectrum or affiliation. I think that's a pretty universal feeling right now. You can, there is a combination. I talked about students who need to see that they can succeed and that students who need to see that they aren't succeeding. A lot of students need both at the same time, which is that is an advanced teaching skill, right? And my best recommendation on that is teach 8th grade for a year. You need to kind of give them some tough love with equal part emphasis on tough and love. But usually, if these people are successful, they're used to succeeding, they hate failing, and so giving them a little taste of failure and a way out to salvage their egos quickly is one tool to try.
One more question?
I just had a sort of a comment that relates to an experience I had in my earlier college days when I was doing a part-time job teaching Australian Aborigines, and it related very much to some of the spatial stuff you're talking about, because in fact I could not communicate with them despite the fact that they had a very decent understanding of the English language. And I went to the library and I tried to figure out why I couldn't communicate. So I started reading up and I found out about this article of a anthropologist, psychologist lady who had discovered that Aboriginals, traditional Aboriginal families had a brilliant spatial memory capacity. They could find their location anywhere in the outback, just because for tens of thousands of years they've been able to find these little water holes without any kind of sort of obvious definition in the landscape. And once I understood that, they actually did this test where they had a chessboard and they put 12 different objects on different checkers and gave them to a classroom of all Aboriginal kids, and gave the same thing to a classroom of non-Aboriginal kids and said, okay, I'm going to get you to observe this location of everything, take it off, and replace everything back in. The Aboriginal kids got like 90% right. The non-Aboriginal kids failed dismally. And after I understood this, I was able to reach in and completely change my whole teaching method. And just suddenly, like the math book said, that they had a railroad track with mileages between the different cities, and they were make-up things. And the kids used to walk these distances, and the numbers were all wrong. And they had this very, very different picture. And I was just looking at it abstractly. I was saying, well, you add this number to this number. But the kids say, oh, no, we walked this, this is not right, So they were always getting them wrong. But how would I know this had I not, reached in? Anyway, I just thought fits in, I feel.
That's a fantastic story. I love that story. And I will tell you, my wife also has a brilliant spatial memory, and it also took me a long time to figure out how to communicate with her. But beyond that, the biggest lesson there is, putting together all this formative assessment and how to look at it, and for different students, and what the term personalized learning could mean, if it meant anything. Really, what it comes down to is meeting your students where they are, with their strengths and their weaknesses. Like, trial lawyers know a lot about this in some ways, right? You've got 12 jurors, and they're not all the same. And you've got to read them, and you've got to figure out if they're following you, and you've got to figure out if they're agreeing with you, and you've got to figure out if you've lost them, right? But you're you're doing this with both hands tied behind your back because you can't ask them any questions, right? You just have to read their faces. So I think law professors, maybe more than any others, should be, maybe forgiven for thinking that that's the way you teach. But now your hands are untied, right? You can talk to those students. You can find out something about their lives. You can find out that one thing, that they have this one way of seeing the world, that if you just put it in those terms, they're brilliant. They get it. You're just not speaking their language yet. And that, I think, more than anything else. So that is the challenge. As you get a more diverse set of students, which is what's happening in law schools. This doesn't mean it's the end of law. Maybe it means it's the beginning of law teaching. And
Perfect place to end. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
no, I was going for the close. So.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Michael. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. There are many issues in there, and I have to go present in 20 minutes. I think it's not printed. So I'm talking about digital immigrants versus teaching digital natives, which is another issue of, again, taking students where they are, and really it's about taking people where you are and realizing that you want to go with slide.
Okay, just so you know.
I am such an idiot. I always forget to bring my card. I have your card now. My pleasure. One quick thing, if you're interested in all the digital immigration resume, there's some folks at Oxford University that framed the issue in a different way that I think is really interesting and thorough, which is digital visitors and digital residents.
Okay, well, I'm also, I didn't see that one, but I'm offering the alternative in 20 minutes.
Okay.
Come as the avoiders, who want to be tourists, eager users, innovators. That's right. No, it's a choice. It's a spectrum on it. So it's whether you're an immigrant, which is also political.
Right.
So,
Okay.
anyway, feel free to join us.
Thank you. I had a long talk with John before. Like I said, John, I get away with a lot of leading ignorance, which also happens to be true, but I did have a conversation with John. If it were easy, it would be boring.
Yes, I understand that. She thinks she knows she's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I get that.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Question for you. I am I'm not actually a course designer for Catalyst. And so when I tried this.
Well, it sounds like your institution is insulating your professors from failure, which is, tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if the students are complaining, that should go directly to the institution and the professor. If it's not, that's a problem.